Welcome to Paulogia and another edition of Ham and Egg News, where we react to Ken Ham reacting to things. If you're new to the channel, tap on the subscribe button so that you can stay up to date on all my latest science, theology, and current event videos.
Now, you were super busy this weekend.
I was super busy, absolutely. So I'm a little sleep deprived.
I know, right? I was super busy this weekend too. I just got back from Faithless Forum 2019 in Dallas, Texas, where I was one of the speakers, alongside YouTube legends like Holy Kool-Aid, Telltale Atheist, Genetically Modified Skeptic, Cosmic Skeptic, Rationality Rules, way too many to list here. All of these great people, and many more, all together in an amazing time of building community. And then the day after the conference, a bunch of us went from Dallas to Austin, specifically the atheist community of Austin, the birthplace of the atheist experience, and we had a chance to crash the Talk Heathen call-in show. During my segment, this crazy thing happened.
Hey, Benjamin, you're live with Eric and Paulogia. How's it going?
Hey, really good. Thank you for taking my call. I really appreciate it. And Paul, welcome to the United States, man.
Thanks so much. You sound familiar. Have you been on my show several times involuntarily?
Have I been set up?
Involuntarily, possibly.
Who am I talking to? Who are we talking to?
That caller was Eric Hoven's former Creation Today co-host, Ben Shetler. And we had a lovely chat about the proofs for God.
And I would disagree. I would say that is illogical to just go, hey, when I look at all of this energy, to say that there is another energy source, but I refuse to call him God.
No, not another energy source. It's the same pool.
Yeah, who said another energy source? And why does it have a penis? You said, I refuse to call him God?
And then later in the show, this happened.
Your question so that you will never forget.
The three of us are going to hell as we speak, so we really need to get this kinds thing so that you can save us before the time runs out, and it's going.
I'm on a show with Paulogia. How cool is that? We're both in real flesh.
And this happened.
As we do every week, we're going to start by throwing up some love rings.
And you have to watch the full episode to see all the shenanigans.
And really thank you to all the people who watch Answers News. So many people came up to me as the MC and were saying thank you for this program, how they're encouraged and equipped by this program, and they're thankful for it. So we are thankful that you're thankful and glad it's helpful.
We're thankful that you watch.
That's so strange because I had the exact same experience at Faithless Forum. So many people came up to me to thank me for Ham and Egg News and how they're encouraged and equipped by the program. And every one of those conversations was so encouraging to me. Thank you so much to those who took a minute to say hello.
From phys.org, studies of fossil teeth reveal another Pliocene ape species from Southeast Asia.
Did someone mention Pliocene apes?
Indeed they did, Bill Ludlow. Indeed they did. But I don't think they know what it means.
Back in the 50s, it was interpreted as what they call a prehistoric human, but now they're renaming it as a ape as opposed to some form of
and that's
human.
Never happened before.
Never,
right?
ever. There's never been a misinterpretation of the fossil.
These guys never cease to amaze me. If they're going to laugh, they need to laugh at themselves and their creationist counterparts, too. Creationist Peter Line, writing in the Journal of Creation number 20 in April 2006, said, "It is my opinion that nearly all the fossils that evolutionists attribute to Homo erectus are human, and this would include the fossils assigned to Meganthropus." He also noted, perhaps creationists who do entertain the idea that some of the Meganthropus fossils represent giant humans could be forgiven. Giant humans? Some think they were more than just that. Charles T.G. Clarke, in an article called The Fossil Hominin Remains of Sengiran, Java, noted this: though taxonomically and scientifically redundant, Meganthropus is used by pseudoscientific creationists as evidence for the Nephilim, giants that lived before Noah's flood, referenced from an Iron Age manuscript called the Book of Enoch. And they're laughing at us?
The material, the results, the conclusion had a lot of the method.
Calling it Homo as opposed to Australopithecus.
Yes.
Personally, I have to agree with them a bit here. I don't think with Homo luzonensis that we really have enough evidence for cranial capacity, bipedalism, and tool use to call it genus Homo, but it certainly wasn't just another ape.
Well, part of the problem with the creationist presentation is that they represent the difference between apes and humans as a binary one. That fossil species are either 100% human or 100% ape. This way they can avoid the obvious conclusion that the gradient between ape and hominid are the exact kind of transitions that evolution predicts. By forcing an ape versus human classification, they ignore that aspect. Honestly, they shouldn't get excited when scientists flip a find from one genus to another, because it just highlights how arbitrary such delineation is.
This is one of the cases that was interpreted at first as human, and actually they found out that it's an ape. and not a human.
Of course, all humans are apes, just not all apes are human, but try to convince them of that.
Which is similar to what's happened in the past with Piltdown Man, Nebraska Man.
No, it's not at all like Piltdown Man and Nebraska Man. We're not talking about fabricating evidence here or recreating an animal from a single tooth. But of course, creationists just can't help themselves from mentioning Piltdown Man and Nebraska Man every chance they get.
They're still kind of trying to put it in this like category to make it seem kind of, well, it's still like related to us as like a distant cousin, even though it's
The
just
language that they use.
It's very evolutionary laden language.
Ooh, evolutionary language. Every indication is that it was an extinct hominid, especially if you look at the teeth, and they've made absolutely no case against that at all.
You are following Facebook on Ken's Facebook
Yes,
page,
yeah,
right?
I'm in the comments here.
She's following the comments there. I'm following comments on the Answers in Genesis page, and then you are following on the YouTube page,
Yes.
correct?
Too bad I'm banned from commenting in all three. I don't know why, really. I mean, I never swore it was real nasty or anything. I just pointed out their mistakes.
I'm banned too. I didn't even point out mistakes. I just tried to have epistemological conversations with those in the chat. Maybe they didn't like an atheist coming across as a good and reasonable person.
The next one comes from Fox News. Woolly mammoth mystery solved. Study reveals shocking details about prehistoric creature. Yeah. So obviously, we've talked about Neanderthals before on the show. They're humans made in God's image, just like us, descended from Adam and Eve through Noah and his family, lived after the flood.
And those differences are significant enough that combined with the differences in physical traits, most scientists still classify them as a separate species, even though there is evidence of limited interbreeding. What I find interesting is that old Earth creationists don't classify Neanderthals as human at all. They classify them as just some other species of ape.
So convergent evolution is the idea that certain traits will evolve at different times on different things given certain environmental factors.
Well, he sort of got that right, but what this article's talking about is that different species evolved the similar traits at the same time, not at different times.
But they can turn it on and off based on how they're pre-programmed to respond.
Right.
Well, there's no evidence it was really pre-programmed. In the case of the LEPR gene, which regulates fat storage in the body, a hormone called leptin binds to a receptor, which triggers a chain of chemical reactions in the brain. But there's no evidence that it was actually pre-programmed.
So it's not something that is going to be added.
Right, yeah, which is what evolution requires. It requires the addition of brand new information, which we're not seeing in this study at all.
Well, here's three people that really don't understand evolution because it doesn't require new information. It works on existing variation.
So because they assume there's a connection between mammoths and the Neanderthals, and this proves that they're going to look for more connections, and now they can better understand it and apply it in modern day science. But they're going to be looking for stuff that isn't actually there.
Well, he seems to be the one making a lot of assumptions here, and the study really did conclude that there was convergent evolution, that it did occur. I would also add that it's very possible that the population that became Neanderthals followed the population out of Africa that became mammoths. The study mentioned that mammoths evolved about 600,000 years ago in Europe and that Neanderthals evolved about 400,000 years ago, but there was a population, we know, of Homo heidelbergensis or Neanderthal ancestors in Europe around 600,000 years ago. Since we know that Neanderthals were dependent on mammoths and other big game, it really makes sense that their ancestors would follow the ancestors of mammoths out of Africa and then co-evolve together in the colder climate.
Right,
and wasting less amounts of time, money, and intellect doing so. Evolution turns out to be just really one of the biggest anti-scientists there is.
Yeah, holding back real research.
How ironic is that?
How did you determine that these connections aren't there, Brian? Don't you tout that early Western scientists were Christians looking to understand God's creation? This is one of the reasons I fight so hard against the messages of Answers in Genesis. They'd rather entirely shut down lines of inquiry that seem threatening to their narrative, rather than let investigation happen and find out what's true.
So this is referring to a story of a middle school teacher who was recently fired because a student got a hold of a topless photo of her that she'd sent to a male colleague that she was dating. Somehow the student obtained it, and they ended up terminating her employment over that. So she is suing the school for improper termination. So this is an issue of gender inequality because she was fired for being a woman, and wouldn't have been fired if she'd been a man in the same situation.
Which, within a biblical worldview, we can understand there's a distinct difference between a woman and a man.
The problem is with this whole within a biblical worldview thing is that the current world does not generally operate on a biblical worldview. Okay, Christianity may be the dominant religion in the United States of America, but so far we don't live in a theocracy, so we don't have to conform, like the whole of society does not have to conform to your personal biblical worldview. And in fact, it doesn't and shouldn't. So really, the fact that the Bible says men and women are different is completely irrelevant in this case.
Well, in any worldview, I think we can realize that there's a distinct difference between a woman and a man, and that one going topless is going to be viewed different than the other one going topless.
Well, there are anatomical distinctions between male and female of any sexually reproducing species. and those visible differences may be more or less pronounced in given specimens and individuals, but in the case of humans, how such differences are viewed are as much cultural as biological. There are tribes in Africa, South America, and New Guinea where women have bared their breasts as the cultural norm for countless generations. In Europe, topless beaches are common and family places. In Japan, they have a rich tradition of a communal bathing culture. Much of the world does not understand how nipple covering relates to morality. This is a North American problem, not a worldview problem.
Our culture is really trying to push this idea that equality means sameness, and that's simply not true.
Yes, because we live in a secular world. We do not live in a religious society. This is so weird. This is so very weird.
This reminds me of one of the Faithless Forum panels last weekend, where the speakers were asked about their views on equality.
I don't care as much about equal representation. I care about equality of opportunity and equality of incentive. And if these two things are achievable, then I don't care as much about equality of outcome.
Yeah, if there really is no such thing as male or female in the modern secular view anyway.
Yeah, what the hell? Of course there's such a thing as male and female. What? It just means, in this particular instance, that a female individual should not be penalized because a photo of her breasts, which she did not send to the student, as far as I'm aware, because a photo of her breasts was seen by someone who should not have seen it. No one here is trying to argue that male and female are the same thing. That's ridiculous. And I have to say, I think this woman and her lawyer make an excellent point. No man is going to be removed from his position of work because a student saw him topless. I mean, it's not terribly appropriate, but they're not going to fire him for it.
It's not just hypothetical. The teacher identified other males on staff who had shirtless photos easily accessible on their social media accounts, but faced no workplace ramifications.
The lawyer went on to talk about how what these people are making her feel as if she did something that was dirty, something that was wrong.
And this whole something that was dirty, something that was wrong is where this gets absolutely infuriating.
But morality doesn't change depending on the generation or depending on our culture or what's happening and whether or not we have cell phones where we can send photos and stuff. Right. Morality is dependent upon God and His Word. We have an unchanging absolute standard for morality.
So morality does not change depending on the generation or culture or whatever. Morality is the same in every single time and place ever because morality has to come from God. Well, I'm sorry, but the fact that you disagree with this woman should be enough evidence that she is operating on a different moral basis than you are. The fact that you can go to a different country and a different culture and it's morally okay there for them to do something that would be completely immoral in your own culture tells you that actually morality is at least a bit subjective.
And even if I agree that the Bible provides an absolute standard for morality, the Bible is wildly unclear as to what that standard is. If we're looking for answers in the book of Genesis, the one this panel is most familiar with, God made Adam and Eve naked. His obvious preferred state for humans. Their shame about being naked was a sin, something immoral. Old Testament figures like Saul, David, and Isaiah are all described as stripping naked to perform acts of worship, and the Bible makes no specific commands about female breasts. When Exodus 28 commands covering of nakedness, it specifies only to cover from hip to thighs. 1 Corinthians 11 comes the closest, saying that women should have long hair to act as a covering. But it's not explicit beyond modest dress. My point is, the modest dress described in the Bible couldn't be more vague and has always been interpreted culturally. For this panel to suggest that wardrobe standards are an unchanging absolute, even in a biblical worldview, is ridiculous.
But as soon as you throw away God's Word and you don't start with God's Word as your foundation, all of a sudden you don't have an ultimate starting point. You don't have an ultimate foundation for your thinking. So it becomes what the culture thinks, or what I as an individual think.
That's exactly what it is. It's what the culture holds to be appropriate. And your culture is very different from my culture. Just because you don't agree with it doesn't mean that it is universally immoral. Obviously, there are some caveats to that. I'm of the personal opinion that murdering someone is always immoral. But you don't have to agree with me just because I say it's immoral.
I think we'd have to get into the nuance of what constitutes justified and unjustified killing for me to agree. I mean, I don't actually hold that universal morality exists in any form, but rather only sets of actions that one can evaluate in the context of agreed upon goals, minimizing suffering, for example. But that's a topic for another time. The point here is, even if there is a collection of oughts that transcend time and culture, clothing choice would have to be among the things that most obviously do not apply. If there was one universal moral standard for clothing choice across all time, why aren't all Christian men wearing Jesus robes 24/7?
The teacher said, "This is the lowest point of my life. I've never felt so small and so defeated, and it wasn't my fault." Now, of course, it wasn't her fault that someone took the picture illegally, and then
that the student got a hold of the picture wasn't her fault. Yes,
but the fact that she took the picture, right, that was a sinful action.
It's sent to her boyfriend, yeah.
A consequence of her sin. We see the ramifications of that. But again,
The thing is, it wasn't her fault, right? Yes, okay, taking nudes and sending them to someone may not be terribly sensible, but whether or not you agree with it, that is the world we live in. That is something that people do.
Including married couples who love Jesus.
And frankly, there should have been no way that this student could get his hands on them. Did this guy send the nudes to the student? Did the student hack his teacher's phone? This isn't her fault. It's like me giving my diary to a friend, someone else stealing the diary from that friend, and then reading it aloud in high school. That's not my fault. It's going to make me feel awful and possibly affect my high school life, but it is not my fault for writing a diary. That's absolutely ridiculous.
This is another example of trying to get rid of the guilt associated with our sin and to blame shift, just like started back in Genesis chapter 3.
Just an interesting aside here, I'm actually sitting recording this naked. I don't know if that's a sin or not, and because of the wonderful magic of Paul's animation, you're not going to see it, but I'm sitting here naked.
Eyes front, Bill. Just keep looking straight ahead.
And then someone here, Roger said, talking about the mammoths and the neanderthals, how they're related because of the epigenome. He says, so does this mean people in Peru and alpacas have similar DNA because they both live in the cold? I don't think so, all right? But anyway.
Maybe that'll be the next study. Who knows?
Roger actually had a great question there, and they just laughed it off. It's not so much the cold, though, as the high altitude. The alpacas are domesticated animals, not like cows, and they're adapted to high altitude, and so are the people that raise them.
All right, from New Scientist, it's not an illusion. You have free will. It's just not what you think. But this article starts out with not talking about humans, talking about digger wasps, which I hadn't even heard of. You have a picture of a digger wasp there.
There we go.
These digger wasps lay their eggs inside of an insect like a cricket that they've stung and paralyzed. And then the larvae hatch and will eat the insect, which is still alive but paralyzed, and then crawl out of it. So it's kind of gross.
So did digger wasps once lay their eggs in fruit? Is that what they're going to go back to soon?
But in a biblical worldview, yes, we're biological machines, as they say here, but there's so much more to us than that. We're made in the image of God. We have a soul. We're not digger wasps.
To make decisions, to make choices. To have
Just like morality, which I touched on with Megan earlier, this probably isn't the time or place to go into a lengthy treatise on free will. But suffice to say that such conversations require a lot of agreement on definitions and terms. It seems clear that human decisions are the product of a combination of our brain chemistry and our specific set of circumstances at the exact instant the decision is made. It has not been well demonstrated that humans are capable of acting outside of these factors, even though we all have an illusion that we are making decisions freely. Of course, such a concession would be extremely difficult for a Christian to accept, because it becomes difficult to condemn someone to hell for actions that the person could not have chosen differently. That's just scratching the surface. Some philosophers make an entire career on the idea of free will. The last weekend I was on hand in person as part of the audience to hear Cosmic Skeptic, Rationality Rules, and Matt Dillahunty talk at length about free will.
We want to say that this agent is the one who took this action, and we need to hold that agent accountable, and that there are things that we can do, both because we are reflective agents and able to consider consequences of our action, that give us this illusion that perhaps we could have done different, or when really what we might often mean is that we wish we'd have done different or we should have done.
Yeah, but interestingly, the reason why compatibilism falls flat for me is because it does have to make this redefinition. And once that redefinition occurs, the reason it's called compatibilism, after all, is because it's trying to make compatible determinism and free will. But if you redefine free will in such a way that it doesn't require that compatibilism, because you don't need the libertarian aspect, then all you're left with is determinism. So you may as well just call yourself a determinist.
But I would say as well that the compatibilism of the redefining, which I wouldn't do because I think it's not helpful, but the position itself, if we call it will or we call it whatever, it's really useful because there is a distinction to be made where there's agents.
Yeah. Definitely check it out if this topic interests you.
This next one also comes from New Scientist. A chimp's hug shows it's time to accept that animals have feelings too. This is looking at the idea of, do animals have feelings? Because it used to be biologists could not say animals had feelings. That was something no, animals do not have feelings.
Well, I don't know that biologists ever said animals couldn't have feelings. There just wasn't a lot of evidence that all animals or most animals had the same type of feelings as humans.
Indeed. I mean, it should be clear that any animal with a nervous system is experiencing feelings of some type or another, even if only pain, hunger, sexual desire, and fear, the survival instincts. Feelings is a vague term, likely used here to form an enticing headline. They're trying to argue sophisticated emotions.
But now people are going on to say, particularly talking about this new book, Mama's Last Hug is the name of the book, about a chimpanzee.
Hey, Avery, I clicked this line.
Good job. Thank you. You're on it.
I haven't read this book yet, but I have read The Bonobo and the Atheist by the same author, Franz de Waal, and it's pretty obvious that chimpanzees do show a range of emotions, including empathy.
Within the evolutionary worldview, all apes today evolved from a common ape-like ancestor over the past and sort of branched off in different ways. We all go back to that common ape ancestor, and we're just reflecting traits of all the different apes today in our particular evolutionary branch.
No one's saying that we're reflecting traits from all the different apes alive today.
It does seem like animals, if you have a dog, the dog can appear to be happy at times. You know, you feel like it responds well when you come home. Now, whether that's a response to, hey, I'm getting food, right, or get some attention by being petted on, or they're actually genuinely on some lower level having an emotional response, we can't be sure.
I can't believe he's questioning whether or not dogs can feel emotion. I mean, guilt, aggression, jealousy, anxiety, obviously, fear. They experience emotion. Now, cats, I'm not so sure.
And they're missing the point that as sophisticated as human emotional response can appear to be, much of it can be broken down to motivations of getting our physical needs met. Food, attention, being petted in the right way by the right person. Even belief in God can be explained in these terms. This is exactly what evolution would predict, but could have been any other way if humans were specially made by a creator. Why is it that the creatures with whom we share the most genetic material are most like us in their expression of emotion?
Moving on to some geology here. Science Daily. New evidence suggests volcanoes caused biggest mass extinction ever.
Wow.
So this is talking about the extinction called the Great Dying from supposedly 252 million years ago. And they're saying potentially it's because of giant volcanic eruptions that were going on over a long period of time. We were commenting, it's really interesting to see how they will believe in any global catastrophe as long as it's not the flood.
This really isn't anything new. In fact, it was proposed decades ago, but it's just that there's more and more evidence all the time confirming it. As far as that flood they mentioned, though, there's absolutely no evidence at all for that.
They end up having to believe in 5 different mass extinctions instead of the Bible's history.
We really don't have to believe in all those mass extinctions, but that's exactly where the evidence leads.
They said many of these eruptions, they were not cone-shaped volcanoes, but rather gaping fissures in the ground, cracking the crust.
Sounds like the fountains of the Great Deep.
All over the earth, just like the Bible describes with the flood.
Geologists can tell if lava was formed underwater, whether it cooled quickly or whether it cooled slowly. There's no evidence at all for any volcanoes like that associated with any fountains of the deep. There's no volcanic evidence at the base of the layers that the creationists say were the early layers that were deposited by the flood either.
And we talk here at the Creation Museum, we have an exhibit that talks about some of these massive volcanoes in the past that put out so much ash and everything, and how that would have affected things.
The whole what we actually see in the fossil record are things like the age of amphibians, followed by a mass extinction, followed by the age of reptiles or dinosaurs, another mass extinction, followed by the age of mammals. It's clear in the fossil record.
Roger on here mentions the fact that there are actually over 270 flood legends around the world that sound a whole lot like Genesis, and he's right about it, even more than that.
About these flood legends all around the world, only the Sumerian myth is similar to the Hebrew myth, and of course it was written earlier than the Hebrew myth. Let's take a look at just a couple of these myths that creationists say are similar to the Hebrew flood myth. This one's from the Pygmies in Africa. Chameleon heard a strange noise like water running in a tree, but at that time there was no water in the world. He cut open the trunk and water came out in a great flood that spread all over the earth. The first human couple emerged with the water. This one's from Siberia. Floodwaters rose for 7 days. Some people and animals were saved by climbing on floating logs and rafters. A strong north wind blew for 7 days and scattered the people, which is why there are now different people speaking different languages. Well, you can hardly tell it from the story about Noah and the ark.
This one comes from LifeSite News. France proclaims trees should have rights. A tree is a living organism whose average lifespan is far longer than that of a human being. It should be respected throughout its life and have the right to develop and to reproduce freely from its birth to its natural death.
You know, I think they pick topics like this and the gender one just because maybe it's a hot button issue with conservatives or they can mock them and make fun of them. But I have to agree with them a bit. There's better ways of preserving the environment than declaring trees have rights like humans do. I have to disagree with them when they say it's a biblical thing, though, because there's no Bible required to protect and conserve our environment or to care about it.
Indeed, Answers in Genesis is on record saying that because the Bible affirms that the earth will not pass away, that people shouldn't concern themselves with issues of climate or environment. Don't worry, everyone. Their book says everything's gonna be fine.
As a matter of fact, if you keep thinking, man is actually the biggest threat to the trees because we cut them down so indiscriminately in that worldview.
We're also the biggest threat to our environment as a whole, but of course you don't agree with that.
So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank goodness that's over.
Well, thanks again, Paul, for having me on the show. It was a real pleasure. And if you guys haven't checked out my YouTube channel, please do. It's just under my name. I also have the website creationsciencefiction.com, and I've started a Creation Science Fiction Facebook page too.
Definitely do. And then find Megan on Digital Hammurabi, where you can check out what I can safely say are the most entertaining Assyriology videos that exist here on YouTube. If you'd like to see me participating in the co-hosting Round Robin Mayhem from our Faithless Forum edition of Talk Heathen, tap on that video. Otherwise, tap on the video below for another amazing video from me, Paulogia. See you there.